Klint Kubiak is officially interviewing for the Browns offensive coordinator job. I'll tell you why he's the best choice to fill the void coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. I think I know who the next Browns offensive coordinator should be, and he actually just interviewed for the job on Monday. Sunday, during the wildcard weekend, served as a reminder as to why the Browns made the Deshaun Watson trade in the first place, and you and your rival are more alike than you might think. As always, I want to thank you for being on every day here at the Locked On Browns podcast. And for making this your first listen every day, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And so we get after it. As I mentioned, Klint Kubiak, formerly of the Saints this past season, he was the offensive coordinator there, is interviewing for the Browns job on Monday as they look for their new offensive coordinator to fill the void that was left by firing Ken Dorsey. They obviously filled the O-line spot. They are still looking for their offensive coordinator. And of all the candidates, there's been several names floated out there in terms of people that they're interviewing for this job. And I think there's some decent ones on there. Like I'm intrigued by Tommy Rees and the fact that he obviously worked closely with Kevin Stefanski this past year on his team. And because he doesn't have the play calling, he's never been a play caller. There's an opportunity there to potentially there's an opportunity there to potentially, nurture him and, let Kevin Stefanski kind of take back the play calling while also letting somebody kind of learn the system and sort of figure out in his own way how to do this, even though he has had the play calling experience at the college level, just not the NFL level. But I don't know that anybody has excited me. Darrell Bevell was interesting because of his history with Kevin Stefanski, dating back to his time in Minnesota from 2006 to 2010. So someone who was obviously had the connection and has worked with Stefanski. But Charles London, Kevin Koger, to me, they're trying to give some guys some interview experience, get some guys that, they're probably intrigued by those guys, but I don't know that they're two truly realistic options for the Browns in terms of guys that they're going to hire when this process is done, just because of their experience at the NFL level as offensive coordinators or play callers not being really much of a thing. But Klint Kubiak is the one that intrigues me the most. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. He sort of combines the offensive play caller prowess that I think is important. Like having a guy who has called plays before, I think is something that is valuable. Even if he's not going to be the primary play caller. But so he combines that part. He brings that part of it to the table where he has called plays before, but he also has, similar to Darrell Bevell, the history and the link and the relationship with Kevin Stefanski that I think is also pretty valuable. Like he blends those two things together. It's not just Kevin Stefanski taking the play calling back and, having sort of I don't want to call it a yes man, but somebody underneath him who is new to play calling and new to being an offensive coordinator. So they just kind of go along with everything. I think there's some value in bringing on somebody like Klint Kubiak, who he's worked with before, who we know he has a great relationship with, and from their time in Minnesota. And that's where this link sort of starts. I take that back. The link between the two really starts with the fact that Kevin Stefanski's offense and his system are based in they're a branch off of Klint Kubiak's father, Gary Kubiak's offense. And so that's what's kind of inspired, and it's the inspiration for Kevin Stefanski's offense as a whole. And so because of that, they have crossed paths on multiple occasions throughout their time as coaches in the NFL. Kubiak was first hired in 2018 to be an offensive quality control coach. He worked with Stefanski closely, who I think was a tight end coach at that time with the Vikings. And then as Stefanski kind of climbed the ranks, he became offensive coordinator for the Vikings in 2019 before he got the job in Cleveland. And he had been sort of he was the interim offensive coordinator the year before, then took over as the offensive coordinator in 2019. And in that year, he brought back Kubiak to be his quarterback coach. So clearly the relationship is there. Clearly there's a trust level there, and they worked together heavily on sort of building the offense and scheming the offense and organizing things because of his time coming back to being with the Vikings. And then 2 years later, Stefanski was obviously gone in Cleveland, but Kubiak actually became the offensive coordinator for the Vikings as well. So that kind of started his trajectory of being an offensive coordinator. He went to the Broncos, went to the 49ers, was a pass game coordinator in 2022 and 2023 respectively. And then he went to the Saints this past year to be an offensive coordinator. Get it? Like, you're probably going to look at the Saints and how things went this year and say, well, why would I want that guy with the way things went and the way that offense kind of looked at times running, or being the offensive mind in the room with Stefanski? I think there's two things that come to mind. A, the Saints had a lot of injuries this year. Clearly, Derek Carr was not the answer at quarterback, and they sort of tried something there, and it didn't work. I also do think, like, just go back and watch that Browns Saints game, and you'll see some stuff on offense that did work, including the way that he used kind of a gadget player in Taysom Hill. So I think there's some creativeness. I think there's some good stuff there. And I do like the fact that they've worked together before and they know what to expect. They know what they're looking for in this offense. They know what it's supposed to look like and how things are supposed to sort of function and operate. And that, I think, is valuable. And again, ultimately, I still think Kevin Stefanski becomes the play caller, whether they hire Kubiak, whether they hire somebody else. But I think what's important here is you have somebody in the room who also is that in tune with the intricate details of this offense. I've made a point in bringing up, like, based on what was said, Kevin Stefanski's end of season press conference, Andrew Berry's end of season press conference, I think this team, the staff, they know they got to get back to doing what they do best on offense. They can't do any more of this gimmicky build around one player. The Deshaun Watson injury news on Friday, I think, clearly spells the end of his time in Cleveland. And so they're pivoting away from that, and they're getting back to the basics on offense, and that's going to be like running Kevin Stefanski's system, trying to focus on getting the run game working a little bit better, and building things off of that, the play action passes, all those different things. So this just feels like the perfect fit because of the history, because of the relationship, because he understands the offense. And I do think because they have that relationship, there's an opportunity for them to sort of push back, or not push back, but I think that Kubiak is going to be able to sort of, be another voice in that room. Another voice sort of steering Stefanski in certain situations or with certain play calls or certain schemes or game plans for a game. And I do think that that's valuable as well. Now, the one thing I don't necessarily know, and this is something I'll have to look into and talk to the right people about, is just what kind of, like, how Klint Kubiak is kind of viewed in a locker room setting and how his players kind of view him, because that's the key thing too. When I talked last week about potentially the Browns pursuing Alex Van Pelt and bringing back an old friend to be their OC, we know that he obviously was a glue guy in that locker room, an important piece in that locker room. And so I do think that that's something that we need to sort of find out and turn over the stones on with Klint Kubiak, and we'll see what it looks like from here. But I do feel here today, and again, it's still, the process still ongoing, but we found out he was interviewing for the job. I think he is the best option for the offensive coordinator position for the Cleveland Browns. Speaking of the Browns offense, speaking of a Browns former quarterback, Sunday on Wildcard Weekend was a reminder as to why the Browns made the Deshaun Watson trade in the first place. I'll tell you all about it and talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. Let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. That's where LinkedIn comes in. The strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, gives you the confidence to make the best decision for your business. I've used LinkedIn Jobs myself, and I can tell you it's a game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. LinkedIn connects you with the best candidates in data you won't find anywhere else, from unique skills and interests to the connections you share. LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high-quality candidates. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions may apply. I have told you guys already. I won one of my in-season fantasy championships, and yeah, those are fun. It's a nice way to win money, but they're also very stressful because you're worried every single week about constantly injuries costing you a season, injuries costing you the money. That's why I try to take the stress out of my fantasy football experience by enjoying football season with PrizePicks. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win over 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you just want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving PrizePicks. Here is a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, so as I alluded to, Sunday, the Browns were not playing on wildcard weekend. We know that after a terrible season. But I couldn't help but sit there and watch. I didn't see the entire game, but the majority of the second half of the Commanders-Buccaneers game. And if you understood where my tease was, you understand where I'm going with this. Yes, Baker Mayfield falls short in that game as the Bucs are bounced from the playoffs by the Commanders and rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels, which is, I mean, 23-20 your final score. But man, Jaden Daniels is a story in of itself because rookie of the year candidate, likely going to win it. Obviously had a phenomenal season, played really well in this game, and sort of wills his team to victory in what's been a notable and memorable and just awesome season for Commanders fans. And it's at the expense of former Browns quarterback Baker Mayfield. And so as I'm sitting there watching this unfold, and you get the fumble late in that game that sets up Washington's game-winning drive and the eventual game-winning field goal. And I couldn't help but think, as I checked the stat lines on this as well, this is why the Browns parted ways with Baker Mayfield when they did. And I don't want to just sit here and like rehash everything and old wounds. I know that Baker still holds a special place in Browns fans' hearts for, you know, the memorable Thursday night when he played, took over for Tyrod Taylor, comes in, leads them to victory, and certainly some other moments, the playoff appearance, the playoff win over the Steelers in Pittsburgh. All those things come to mind as just being, again, why Baker was held in such esteem here in Cleveland. And rightfully so. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't cheer for Baker Mayfield. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, regret or have any regrets about the Browns' decision to move on from him. Because I get it. Like, he is playing better quarterback play. He's giving the Bucs better quarterback play at this point than what the Browns are getting from the man that they basically replaced him with. But I think what's important to note here, and this is a key distinction to think about when it comes to the Browns' thought process. That game was a microcosm of why the team decided to move on from Baker. They did not think he was like in the landscape of the playoffs. You look around the league, and he was never going to reach in their eyes. And I think we had seen enough evidence at that point to know this is true. The Josh Allens of the world, the Patrick Mahomes of the world, the Lamar Jacksons, the Joe Burrows of the world. He just wasn't there. He was not in that tier. Even though maybe Browns fans thought that was a ceiling that he could reach, he wasn't there. And I understand that last season he was in Cleveland, he was hurt, and so you didn't get the full picture. But on top of, as I've talked about on a previous episode, the fact that you had a guy who was just immature and that they didn't really feel like was really a good fit for the locker room. And that's the biggest reason I think they moved on. But knowing that on top of the fact that you saw it play out on Sunday, like Biggs isn't the guy that's going to go out and put up the numbers that you need in a big playoff game. And he isn't going to give you these top tier quarterback performances. And as he did on that final drive where he fumbled, like sometimes he's going to cost you the game. And so in their heart of hearts, I do believe that the Browns didn't move on from Baker Mayfield because they thought like, well, we just don't like this guy. Like, let's just, find somebody else. That was like part of it, I think, was the immaturity. And part of it obviously was they didn't think he was necessarily going to get them over the top and be that franchise quarterback they were hoping for. And yeah, he can win you games and he can do some nice things. But I do also think that in their heart of hearts, this organization was seeking an upgrade. They were seeking to get one of those guys who was supposed to be a top tier, game changing franchise quarterback. And for that, I don't blame them. You can blame the organization for the way this has all gone down. I think the thing that when you look back on the Deshaun Watson trade, the biggest thing you can blame them for and should blame them for is who they decided to replace Baker Mayfield with. They thought they had a great plan in place. They were like, okay, we're going to move on from this guy, but here's who we're going to go get. And at that time, Deshaun Watson was, the last time you'd seen him play football, a top 5 quarterback in the game. So I understand the thought process behind why they went and did it. I understand the thought process behind why they moved on from Baker Mayfield. They just didn't think he was going to give them the best chance to win in games like you saw on Sunday. And as I alluded to, like where he fits in sort of like the quarterback tier hierarchy, I think you saw a quarterback who's on a trajectory to be a better quarterback in this league, and Jaden Daniels outduel him. I mean, he had the better numbers in the game. Baker was 15 of 18 for 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. That feels like a very Brownsian stat line. And I understand he still had a chance to win, but who came out on top? The better quarterback came out on top. And a guy who has a chance to sort of take this league by storm and seize the moment and become one of those top tier guys in the league. But I go back to what I was saying from the Browns' perspective of things, which is, again, the thought process of trying to upgrade, the thought process of trying to get a better quarterback and find that guy was sound. That is what every team is aspiring to do. And so I don't blame them for doing that. What I do blame them for is maybe not vetting Deshaun Watson as much as they should have. And if that's the case, yeah, you can make an argument that they maybe shouldn't have moved on from Baker Mayfield if they maybe understood what they were getting into even further, or really vetted the process a little bit further. Maybe they could have fallen back on that rather than run him out of town. And I do think Baker's immaturity was on full display during that time too, because you had a quarterback who basically, or you had a guy who basically, like, as soon as the Deshaun Watson rumors popped up, he was like, I want traded. And I can't blame him for that. It's a very human reaction. But if he had been able to maybe I know Wyatt Teller's talked about this, like if he had sort of just kept his mouth, not said anything, maybe he comes back and maybe at some point they're like, you're still our starting quarterback because we think you're better than him. I don't know how it all would have played out. Maybe it still wouldn't have worked out. But again, maybe they don't make that trade and pursue it if they vet the process further and understand Deshaun Watson. I think they understood the baggage he was coming with, but they kind of wrote it off. And I don't know that they anticipated how much it would really rip apart the fan base in some respects. And I also don't. The biggest flaw I think in this plan was that they didn't necessarily account for how much the not playing since 2020 and then getting suspended. They miscalculated what the suspension was going to be. They miscalculated how much the year of plus away was going to impact his play on the field. And they also miscalculated how a guy who was considered like a Boy Scout in the league and then had all this off the field stuff come up and he was involved in all this off the field stuff by his own doing. It was I'm not taking the blame off of him. Like, he created this monster. But the problem is they didn't account for, the Browns, how much that was going to impact him on and off the field from a mental standpoint. Because I do think the biggest problem with Deshaun Watson when we've seen him out there on the field is the mental side of it. He's not seeing the field well. He's not the same quarterback. He's not processing the same. And time away from the sport on top of everything that's kind of mounting outside of just football against him. And he became a villain. And some people handle that better than others. He clearly didn't. And they didn't account for that. And it's why we are where we are. And it's a problem. Like the Browns, obviously, again, I understand the thought process on we got to get better at this position. And given the performance you saw from Baker, I'm not trying to do like victory laps around the fact that like, yeah, they moved on. No, there's none of that involved when the option you chose was Deshaun Watson, and it's gone royally terrible for this franchise. But the idea and the concept of we need to get better at this position, let's go out and try to get an upgrade. That is what everybody should want out of their team. That is what everybody should want out of the Browns. That is what everybody should want out of this franchise. So I do think there's almost like a see the forest of the trees on this, where you should be able to recognize, like, okay, they were trying to do something here that was for the betterment of the team and something that fans would have been thrilled with if they got it right. The process of getting there, however, is what they got wrong. But I watched that game on Sunday and was reminded, like, this is why they felt the need to go out and move on from this guy and find somebody else and look for upgrades. They just, and I can say that I don't mean that as like a throwaway statement. This has been a total disaster since the day he got in this building. But I at least understand where they were coming from, and that's the point that I'm trying to make. As the Browns enter this offseason with lots of questions, some have said maybe they should just rebuild. What's funny about that is you and your rivals are more alike than you actually think. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. It's that time. That's right. The NFL playoffs are here. Wildcard weekend just got rolling this weekend, and the action's only going to continue for the weeks ahead. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed during the playoffs with FanDuel. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for bets, same game parlays, and so much more. I'm a big anytime touchdown parlay builder. I like to lock into that during the playoffs. I even sometimes push my luck a little further and try to nail who will score the first touchdown in some of these playoff games. I didn't do it this weekend. I was worried about it being too many blowouts, but I will be doing it next weekend for the division round. We got some really good matchups on deck. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. All right, so the Browns season ended, and given what Myles Garrett said, sort of in the weeks leading up to the end of the season, and after the season had gone completely off the rails about his future and potentially, wanting to or considering or at least leaving the door open that he would play somewhere else at some point, all those things, I found it interesting that the Steelers, who made the playoffs out of the AFC North, your division rival, your biggest rival in many respects, ended up losing to the Ravens on Saturday night. And the majority of reactions that I saw on social media, which aren't always the best read of a fan base, but it certainly felt like the overwhelming thought or prevailing thought from Steelers fans was that it was time to fire Mike Tomlin, time to blow it up, and time to start all over, which sounded oddly familiar because that was the same tune that Browns fans were singing late in the season, towards the end of the season, and even in some respects now as they go into the offseason with a lot of questions, some holes to fill, no quarterback, and some have thrown out like trading Myles Garrett. That was something I saw Steelers fans doing. Trade TJ Watt, your best player. Let's just start from scratch. And I found it interesting that a team that missed the playoffs entirely, had one of the worst seasons on record, maybe the worst season since the franchise returned in 1999, ended in a place where they were saying time to rebuild and start all over. And then a team that made the playoffs and had a largely successful season, still some mediocre quarterback play, although I don't think Russell Wilson was honestly the problem in that game on Saturday. I think it was other problems for the Steelers. And, continues to come up short in the playoffs, and, questions mount about Mike Tomlin and his ability to get the job done in the postseason. And Steelers fans are growing tired of this get into the playoffs but don't really make any noise, this purgatory that they're sort of stuck in, particularly at the quarterback position. And I understand that. I understand why Steelers fans would feel that way. But so I just found it ironic that the Steelers fans and Browns fans kind of ended up in the same place in terms of like the directions of their franchises, respectively. And it's rare to hear the Steelers talk this way or Steelers fans talk this way because their organization has generally been the model of consistency across the NFL, or at least one of them across the NFL. So I found this kind of interesting, and it got me wondering, would you rather be a team like, would you rather be in the Browns situation where you're so bad that you have a chance to draft a franchise quarterback, but you don't really trust them to nail that thing, and like, I don't know, would you rather be the Steelers, who are sort of stuck in that quarterback purgatory, and they're so good that they never get the opportunity to draft that franchise quarterback, but they just can't get the job done in the playoffs? And I still maintain, and maybe this would change over time. Like, I understand why for Steelers fans it's gotten old. I get it. But for Browns fans here in Cleveland, I have to believe that you and others would 100% sign up for getting in the playoffs every year, which is kind of funny based off of the last conversation we just had in regards to watching Baker Mayfield sort of throw away, or fumble away rather, a playoff game and just put up sort of like mediocre numbers against the Commanders. He was the quarterback that probably could have gotten you to the playoffs consistently, and maybe not won a lot, or maybe not gotten you over the hump, but he would have at least gotten you there. And I just kind of said, like, I understood why the Browns moved on from him because of that reason, because you do have to swing big and try to get that franchise quarterback. But I also understand where, like, I think you and most Browns fans would sign up for what the Steelers have, especially because I hear Browns fans chime in on this topic every offseason when it comes up, that they would take Mike Tomlin in a heartbeat if he were to become available, because everyone thinks he's a damn good coach. Rightfully so. I think he is a damn good coach. And I get it. Like, sometimes messaging wears off and guys stop sort of buying in. And maybe that's what's happened in Pittsburgh, but it's not like this guy forgot to like win in the playoffs. It's just, I think the quarterback situation has kind of left him in that spot. And again, I understand where for Steelers fans that gets old. You get sick of not ever really having a chance at the top tier guys and getting that franchise quarterback that can get you to that next level in the playoffs. But at the same time, man, playoffs every year where you at least give yourself a shot at making some noise, Browns fans, in my estimation, would sign up for that 10 times out of 10. And I think that is what you'd rather have, especially because I get it. I understand the difference between stinking so bad that you could draft a quarterback and being in that purgatory that everybody sort of doesn't want to get lost in, where you're just like spending years kind of like treading water, and yeah, you're winning. And so you can point to these things as success. I get why that gets frustrating, but I also think if you're in the Steelers' shoes, that also comes with the realization, and it also comes with the realization that you have a culture that is built to last, and a winning sort of culture within your franchise. Like I said, Steelers have been one of the gold standards in this league for years when it comes to winning and just success and making the playoffs. And so that is something that seems like it's been built to last, whether it was, Bill Cowher before Mike Tomlin and now passing the torch to Mike Tomlin. And so that's, I think, the thing that it really gives you. It gives you credibility. It gives you respect. It gives you that culture that I think Kevin Stefanski's established to an extent, but I know that's been called into question given how the season went this past year for the Browns. But yeah, like I get where it's enticing. It's exciting to have a top 2 pick and have a shot at the franchise quarterback. A franchise quarterback, mind you, the Browns haven't been able to really nail since they came back in '99. But I ultimately would take being in the playoffs every year for this team and understanding like you have something built here. And if you just have an opportunity to ever get that quarterback, the sky is the limit group, rather than just kind of wondering and guessing every single year on like, is this the year we're going to get that quarterback? Do we have a chance to get him? And I mean, the losing stinks. And I know many of you are sick of that as well. So I don't know. I just thought it was interesting that Browns fans and Steelers fans kind of ended up in the same place. And I was curious where you'd rather be when it comes to the state of your franchise. Sort of mediocre enough to make the playoffs but never really get that far, or have the opportunity to draft a franchise quarterback and be so bad. Given how some Browns fans are talking, maybe they would take the latter, because it seems like that's where people want to go this offseason. But I would take the winning in the playoff appearances. That seems like a fun thing for a fan base and a franchise that hasn't really seen much of that since they came back in a little over 25 years ago. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team here during the offseason. There'll be plenty more to come in the weeks and months ahead. So I implore you to continue to stay tuned to the Locked On Browns podcast. I appreciate you making us your first listen every day. For your second listen, go check out the new Locked On NFL show, or if you want to keep it local, you can check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thanks for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon. But for now,